I would sit down with my guitar. I wouldn't be trying to write a song. I'd just be playing my guitar. And I'd get into a nice groove with some rhythm and some nice chords. Sometimes a song would come, and sometimes a song would come all the way, all by itself. Lonesome Mary was one of those. It was in the time it takes to play it. The song came out. It just came out. And it was interesting because if you're a person like me, with my mind is always buzzing, it's hard to turn it off. And really, that mind that's always buzzing, it doesn't know the first thing about writing songs. Because songs have got to come from somewhere deeper than that. Crazy Talk came out the same way. Baby Blue, same thing. Other songs, they took a long time. I just finished one that's called A Dusty Old Guitar. And that song, I wrote the title and the first line in 1974. And I always liked it. I could never finish it. I didn't know where it wanted to go. And a couple years ago, it came to me and I managed to finish it. It took all that time, man. That's a long time. It's almost 50 years.
I'm Peter McCully. That's Bill Henderson, singer, songwriter, music producer, and frontman for the group Chilliwack. We'll chat when Today in BC continues.
Hey, it's the Moj, Bob Marjanovic. Join me on the Moj on Sports podcast on Black Press Media at todayinbc.com. Listen into conversations with well-known athletes and celebrities as we look behind the scenes at these successful people. Listen in to the Moj on Sports podcast on todayinbc.com. You'll also find the Moj on Sports podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, iHeart, YouTube, and Google Podcasts, as well as mojonsports.com.
Thanks for making time for us on the podcast today, Bill.
Yeah, thank you for having me, man. Good to talk to you.
Before Chilliwack, you were in several bands popular in Vancouver, one of which was the Collectors, I think the late 60s, released a couple of albums, and you seemed to do pretty well.
Yeah, we did. I joined the band in 1966. We were playing Torch Cabaret. A guitar player had left. We weren't the Collectors yet. We were the Torch band. And when I joined the band, I know they'd been doing a bit of writing before. When I joined the band, we wrote pretty much every day. It was mainly Howie Vickers, Claire Lawrence, and myself that were doing the writing, but we were really into it. We just worked hard and really enjoyed it. And people started coming by and to see the band, and because we were doing new and unusual things. A guy became our manager, and he had a friend in LA, and the guy in LA had a record company called Valiant Records. So he got us a deal with Valiant Records. We went down, recorded, did our first recording, and it was still 1966. We made our first single in the winter of 66, and it came out in early 67. We still didn't have a name. We couldn't decide on a name. We had tried everything. We couldn't decide on a name. And finally, the record company had mixed the record, and they were printing labels. They phoned us up and said, "You guys, we got to print labels. What's the name of your band?" And they said, "Look, you're either the Connection or the Collectors. Make up your mind." And we said, "We'll get back to you." So that's how we got our name. And musically, we weren't so reticent. We had all kinds of stuff going on, lots of songs. And we ended up playing in California a whole bunch. We played with the Doors. We played with the Grateful Dead. We played with Frank Zappa, Big Brother and the Holding Company, Janis Joplin, Albert King. Chicago, when they were called the Chicago Transit Authority, the world just opened up. We wanted to get into this new music that was happening, was psychedelic and stuff, and that's what we wanted to get into. And Claire and I had training in classical music and jazz as well. He was a serious jazz player. I was a wannabe and was doing some playing, but was learning it. And so we brought these things to this rock band and just exploded the rock traditions, as was happening in other places. The Beatles were the ones that I first heard doing that. I was just so inspired by them and felt like, man, we could do anything really. And so we started doing all kinds of stuff. And yeah, the band did really well.
I was surprised to find out that the Collectors had composed the soundtrack to 3 Canadian movies during the late 60s. How did those projects come about?
3 movies that we scored were in the Canadian Pavilion in Expo 70. The Canadian government, I think they had handed off this thing to the National Film Board. They hired us to do all the music for the Canadian Pavilion. And there were 3 short features. And it was quite amazing to be in that position. We took it all for granted. When I look back at it, It's incredible.
Yeah, that was certainly spreading your wings pretty quickly. I went and found those on YouTube and listened into them. They're fascinating. I understand about this time in your career, you were moving away from folk and jazz.
When I was a kid, what woke me up to music was this amazing guy called Elvis and this whole culture of the South. He was born in Mississippi, I guess Tupelo, right? And got his career happening in Memphis. And the whole Southern thing that he embodied was attractive to me and to obviously a lot of other people. It just made me want to make music. So rock, that was the first thing that woke me up to music. I liked music before that, but now when I heard rock, I had to get a guitar. My parents got me a guitar when I was about, 8 or 9 years old. I didn't know how to tune it or anything. I just sat there for a day and played open strings. It meant so much to me. So that was in the mid 50s. That was like 56, 57. By the time I got to 58 and 59, that stuff was over. Buddy Holly was dead. Elvis had joined the army and was in Germany. And the music had gotten tamed, I felt. And I've said this many times to people, and I've never really heard people agree with it, but reading Robbie Robertson's autobiography, he felt the same thing. And what he did was he went deeper into rock. So he started working with Ronnie Hawkins, and Ronnie was from Arkansas. So there was that whole Southern thing happening there. So he went to the roots of that Southern thing that I love so much too. He went there, but I didn't. I just dialed out of rock and went to folk and jazz. My sister and I had a little folk act. We played on TV up in northern BC when we lived in Fort St. John. And then we moved to Edmonton and we did it at the Yardbird Suite when it was on Jasper Avenue. And there was jazz in the Yardbird Suite, and I'd go and hear the jazz, and I heard some incredible music. When I ran into Claire Lawrence, who was the person who called me up about joining the Collectors, I had just seen Hard Day's Night. I suddenly knew that rock was alive again, but Claire was a jazz player. I saw him play in a club in Vancouver, and he blew my mind. He was, and he still does. He's an amazing talent, amazing melodic player, beautiful. So the jazz was there, and the folk had just come out of. I was into jazz, and then Hard Day's Night, I put the acoustic guitar under the bed, pulled out the electric, and started writing songs. The night that I saw Hard Day's Night, I started writing rock songs, and I just didn't stop.
Chilliwack's had many hits over the years, including Lonesome Mary, California Girl. We know them all. We can sing them all. Many of the songs that you've written or co-written, what is your process? I know it's different and personal for every musician.
Like I say, I had been into folk music. I was in jazz. So being in jazz, I was really starting to get into harmonic complexities. While I was into jazz, I went to study music at UBC. I came out of UBC, and pretty soon there was the Collectors. So the first thing I did was I went, man, I know all this stuff about music. I should be able to write great songs. So I started writing things that I'm really impressed with, that I thought were really amazing. And because they were so involved, they showed how much I knew about music. Nobody really gave a rat's ass about that, to tell you the truth. And I learned after a while that if I wanted to write songs, I was better off listening than dictating. So I would sit down with my guitar. I wouldn't be trying to write a song. I'd just be playing my guitar, and I get into a nice groove with some rhythm and stuff like that, and nice chords and stuff. Sometimes a song would come, and sometimes a song would come all the way, all by itself. Lonesome Mary was one of those. It was in the time it takes to play it, the song came out. It just came out. And it was interesting because if you're a person like me, with my mind is always buzzing, it's hard to turn it off. And really, that mind that's always buzzing, it doesn't know the first thing about writing songs, because songs have got to come from somewhere deeper than that. So I found by just playing my guitar, and it's up against my belly and it's booming away, it relaxes me and I feel good and I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and bingo, something just comes out. And that was one. Other ones that worked for me in that way, Crazy Talk came out the same way, Baby Blue, same thing. Other songs, they took a long time. I had something that I knew I liked, and I worked on it, and I kept working on it. With I Believe, I had the chorus right away, but I couldn't get the verse. And I wrote 3 different verses, and I don't mean different lyrics. They were indeed different lyrics, but they were also different chords and different melodies. So completely different setting for the verse. And I started to realize that what was going on was I was making the verse the star. And in that song, the chorus has got to be the star. The chorus is the star. So the verses had to sit down a bit. So I was learning a little bit about the family of parts of a song. And the third time around, I finally got the verse. And there's been a number of songs where I've worked quite hard on. And I just finished one, the band, but we play this song now. It's called A Dusty Old Guitar. And that song, I wrote the title and the first line in 1974. And I always liked it. I could never finish it. I didn't know where it wanted to go. And a couple years ago, I guess it was probably 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, it came to me and I managed to finish it. And we've started recording it. I don't know if we'll ever finish it. It's so slow now. But it's amazing, like that one. It took all that time, man. That's a long time. It's almost 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was it your interest in songwriting that interested you to serve as a director with the Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences and as president of SOCAN, the Songwriters Association of Canada? As I know, I had the pleasure of serving on a few juries for SOCAN for music grants years ago. I found it pretty rewarding.
I did too, but I didn't go in that way. What I was coming from was that I'd been working with the music industry. My friend Claire, he always used to say, I love music, I hate the industry. And I got so that I was concerned about the industry, the way that I felt it manipulated artists and their careers. I was mystified by some of the attitudes I met around the boardroom tables when we'd be negotiating a deal or going in to talk to the president of the company to talk about whether we were going to have a deal with them or not. Just how they got to be such heavy-duty dudes, how they got to be like, so we're little and they're big. I got an opportunity, and the first one was CARAS. Someone phoned me up and asked if I would like to do it, and I thought about it, and I came back with, what is it you want me to do? I've never been on a board before, and what do you want me to do? They said, we'd like you to represent the artist's viewpoint. And I went, aha, okay, good. Yeah, I'd like to do that. I think I caused them a little more trouble than they were hoping for, but because I pushed for some things that were, in my opinion, came from the artist's viewpoint that a lot of artists I knew would have bought into, and I got a lot of pushback. But it was really interesting. And then for me, SOCAN was a study. I was with SOCAN for I think 23 years on the board, and I was the president for a while and was vice president for a long while. SOCAN just taught me just a tremendous amount. And the thing I really learned from SOCAN was that organization and similar ones around the world, because there are SOCANs, just different names all over the world. They're all doing the same thing. They are protecting the author's rights, the author being songwriter in my case. But if you are, in fact, an author that is just writing lyrics, let's say for musicals or even operas or whatever, you're covered. All the composers are covered. SOCAN collects their earnings from the people playing their music, whether it's live playing, whether it's records being played, whether it's files being played, streamed, all of that. SOCAN collects all of that. So what I learned was that there was an organization that had the interests of the creator in mind. I knew that record companies, as much as they love music, there were most people who were in record companies were there because they love music. I grant them that, and I love it that they love it. That's so important. But business came first, especially at the top. When you're right at the top, you're thinking about shareholders. And here was an organization that was looking out for the creative people. So I loved that. I learned, and I was taught by many wonderful people that worked there. Michael Rock was probably more than anyone my mentor. He allowed me to be my totally obstructive and inquisitive self. I wouldn't stop asking questions until I got answers. I would not stop until I got answers. And all I needed was a simple answer. And they always managed to give me one. So that was cool. And then the Songwriters Association, it was just a natural fit. Being on the SOCAN board equipped me well for that. And I really enjoyed doing that with my friend Eddie Schwartz. We went out and fought the good fight for songwriters.
Bill, I ran across a story when I was reading about Chilliwack's early days, and the band loved to improvise musically on stage. So that must take a special group.
It does take a special group. We were pretty well equipped. When we were doing that, we were just a trio. So that works well for improvisation because you don't have to keep track of too many things. And when you're improvising, you have to listen to what everybody else is playing. You got to make sense out of it. They got to make sense out of everyone that they hear playing. And so it goes around the band. So if it's just a trio, it's much easier to do. We were a trio, and Claire Lawrence and I were both jazz psychedelic players. And Ross, the drummer, had also played jazz and he was the drummer for the Collectors, so he certainly had a background in kind of psychedelic, freely composed music. We played a gig with Vanilla Fudge and It's a Beautiful Day. You might not remember It's a Beautiful Day, but Vanilla Fudge did pretty well. We played between them. Beautiful Day played first, then we played. So we got up on the stage, but the only problem, this is the Collectors, the only problem was that Howie, our singer, and Glenn Miller, our bass player, were not there, and we had to start. So we jammed. We just started to play. And we used to do that. We'd do that with anything. Have break a string, we'd make something up. And so we started doing that, and the audience was starting to go nuts. They were loving it. They were just really digging it. Then Howie and Glenn came running through the audience up onto the stage and joined in. At the end of it, the audience was really excited about it, and I made a lot of noise. And we said, what should we do? What should we do? What should we do? Oh, we'll do the What Love Suite. That was our big opus. It was an 18-minute piece that was the whole side of an album and was a big thing for us. So we played that. The audience just went ape. They went nuts. And so it was great. We left the stage and felt good and everything. And we blew so many people off the stage in Vancouver, big acts that would come and we'd open for them, that one of the journalists for, I think it was the province, proposed a insurance policy for headline acts that had to follow Chilliwack because they were going to get blown off the stage. That's what he was saying.
Hence the saying, tough act to follow.
Yeah. The real moral of that story is there is I don't think, no written music that can beat a really fantastic improvisation, because what happens with the improvisation is you're including the audience. They are a part of it. If you play with your back to the audience, that's a whole other thing. But we weren't doing that. If they made a sound, we got on it. There was one time, this band, they pulled our plugs. We were opening for them, and they figured we'd gone on too long. They pulled our plugs, right? So the guitar and the bass were gone. Claire was playing bass, I was playing guitar. They're gone. But the microphones were still working because the PA system was way out in the audience there, and they couldn't get out there to do that. They would never be allowed to do it. And so the drums, Ross just kept playing. The drums are going out over the PA. Ross just kept playing like a monster. It was great. It was really great. And I said to Cliff, our road manager, Cliff Jones, I said, go down to the dressing room and grab those 2 metal garbage cans that we were playing on down there. And he brought them up, and we put them down on the stage, line on their sides, pulled the microphones down, Claire on one side of the stage, me on the other. We both did this. We had drumsticks. We start playing with Ross, and we're playing on the garbage cans. The audience goes, holy crap, what's going on? Look at this. And so we're doing this, and then we start leaning into the mics going, they pulled our plugs, man, right? Doing this stuff, and the audience went crazy. They knew what had happened, and that was part of the magic of the music. It was not in a vacuum. It was not, here's a nice song for you, here's our hit, just like it sounds on the record. It wasn't that. It was, you're here, and this is happening, and we're having a good time with it. How about you? That's what we're saying to the audience, and they're going, yeah. So, that's what the whole improvisation thing that we did was about. It was about finding the audience and playing them.
When Today in BC continues, Bill Henderson talks about UHF and what lies ahead.
Why spend hours searching dealerships, comparing makes and models? Find the best of BC's inventory in one place, todaysdrive.com. You'll have access to inventory across BC, where you can easily find a vehicle that fits your needs and gets you where you need to go in comfort. Get in the driver's seat. Don't miss out on the many options we have available for you. Powered by Black Press Media, todaysdrive.com connects you with exclusive new and used car deals.
I'm Peter McCully. Today in BC is a Black Press Media podcast. Bill, in 1989, you had a new gig, musical director for the Canadian edition of Sesame Street. I'll bet that was fun going to work there every day.
The work was happening in my basement, but yes, I did really enjoy it. I had a great producer, Kathy Chilco. She was at CBC in Vancouver, and she was an artist herself, able, and still is, I'm sure, able to see potential in things. So what would happen is she'd send me these tapes, and they'd be videotapes of one of those little short segments that they did, and I'd listen to it, and I'd come up with the music, and I'd phone her up. I think the internet was happening, but there was no bandwidth. I held the phone up in front of my speakers and play it for her, and she was usually really excited about it and said, wow, I never thought about it like that. I remember doing that one time. Oh, I never thought of it that way. I had a wonderful time doing that. And what they were doing with kids, I just thought it was fantastic. And I had watched Sesame Street for years with my kids, and I always liked it.
In 2019, Chilliwack was inducted into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame by your good friend Randy Bachman.
This is true. I emailed Randy and asked him if he would do it, and he was delighted to do it, which was a great pleasure. I was happy to have him do that. The Hall of Fame said to me on the phone, they said, this is not for you. This is for Chilliwack. And it made me think. And I thought, wow, how many guys have been in the band? And I worked it all out. There's 26.
Wow.
So I thanked every one of them in my speech at the Hall of Fame. And I also told them what the word Chilliwack means. The word Chilliwack means as far as your canoe can go. So I said, here we are, our canoe's still afloat.
Let's talk about UHF for a minute. You took a break from Chilliwack and released a couple of albums with Shari Ulrich, best known for the Hometown Band, and Roy Forbes, best known as Bim, I guess, in his early days. Fantastic complementing vocals for the three of you in that group, and produced a couple of albums.
Yeah, it was great. It was great working with him. It was interesting because it's different than working with a regular band, because the regular band's got a rhythm section that's kind of behind you, the guitar player, the singer, those people, the front, and there's the people behind you. But in this band, we played all the roles. We made the rhythm happen, and we made the melody happen, and we made the chords happen. We did it all. You know, I felt like I was working with people that basically did the same thing that I did. They wrote songs. They were responsible for an audience. When you're standing up there on stage, you know, there's people who get to sit back and they don't have to talk, don't have to say anything to the audience. It's a whole other world. If you're the one, if you're the one that is working with the audience, there's an art to it, and it's a responsibility, and you have to tune in to where they are, tune into the room, and sometimes have to deal with some pretty difficult situations. This band was a band where there were three people who had all done that. Any one of them could do that, could be the lead singer, could write the song, could be the drums and bass, except we weren't playing drums and bass, but with our instruments. So that was really cool.
Reading the liner notes, I was, and that shows my age, I was reading the liner notes. I was surprised to see that you played accordion as well. So how many instruments do you play?
Oh, not very many. I had played piano in the past, and at that time I was playing some piano. So accordion was something I could get into pretty quick. I certainly couldn't play button key. I just played right hand. I just played the piano keyboard. I didn't even play the bass notes on the left hand. I got away with blue murder, but I enjoyed it. It was fun. Yeah, I like the sound. And during this period of time, the way we formed was that Roy and Shari had been doing folk festivals for many years. They were asked by one festival to work together. This guy said, we want you to put together a group. We want it to be the two of you and one other person. It just so happened that for maybe a year or two before that, I had already put Chilliwack up on the shelf, and I was doing solo work, and I was playing folk festivals because that's the best place to do solo work, festivals and folk clubs. And Shari and Roy had seen me, and they said, well, let's get Bill. At that point, I was producing some people, and one of the people I produced was the Irish Rovers. They'd had a couple big hits. They were going to do something where they're going back a little more to their roots, to their Irish roots, and they needed to educate me because I didn't really know that much about Irish music. So they did. They sent me some incredible music.
Being out on the road for many years, Bill, I'm sure you've made friends with a number of musicians. Who have been some of the longest friendships?
Claire Lawrence would be the longest. Like, I met Claire in 1966, and he introduced me to Jerry Adolph, who's our drummer, the Chilliwack drummer. We got together in 1985, and he's a great friend. He's a riot. He's a very funny guy. And Claire is just one of the most, he's quite fatherly, which for me was really good when I joined that band. He's very supportive and always pointing out the things that you do best. He became a producer, and he produced jazz for CBC for a couple decades probably. Claire's been a friend for a long time. And we're working together now in a band called Skanagwa with a Haida woman named Terry Lynn Williams Davidson. I helped her make an album where they recorded all of the Haida traditional music. I engineered it, and we formed this group called Skanagwa. My daughters are in it as well. And Doug Edwards was a great friend. I knew him from way back when, in the early 70s, I would get called in to do, I was a session musician in Vancouver a fair amount of the time, a session guitar player, and I'd get called in, and a lot of times Doug would be playing bass on the same pieces that we were working on. He worked with Valdi a lot. He was in Hometown Band, and Valdi's become a great friend over the last 30 years here on Salt Spring. He and I do music together, and Shari's really a friend, and Roy as well, and Rick Scott, and lots of them. I think of friends in a funny way. My best friend, I haven't talked to him for 6 months. He's my best friend, and I feel good about him. I haven't not talked to him because I don't feel good about him. I think he's fantastic. I love the guy. We don't need to talk. We're friends. We'll always be friends. And I feel that way about friendship. I feel that the essence of friendship is spiritual, and it doesn't always require a constant tending. But some people would disagree with that.
You mentioned your two daughters had helped you with that particular piece of music. They've had careers in the music business as well. How does that make you feel?
No, I'm very proud of them. I'm proud of what they've done. I wish I could have helped them more. I'm not very good at that, but I help them musically, I hope, the three of us. And we end up doing weddings and funerals a fair amount because we harmonize and sound really nice singing together. And I can support us on acoustic guitar and make something that people really enjoy and that's suitable for that kind of an occasion. But also Saffron and Camille, Saffron is the older one. We did a live album with Chilliwack, and they're on that album. They sang lots of background vocals for me. They did background vocals on the last Chilliwack studio album, which was 1984. They do vocals for all kinds of artists and recordings for them, most notably Jan Arden. They've been on a number of her recordings. And Bob Rock, who produces Jan and is a famous top-level record producer worldwide, calls on Saf and Camille to do various things. He loves the way they sound, and they do a great job, so they get lots of work.
You were out on the road in 2022 with the latter half with Chilliwack. You'll be back out in 2023?
Yep. We'll be also doing quite a bit of festival work in the summer, I imagine. We usually do, and we've got a few booked already. We only do 20-25 dates a year, which is great. I like that. We don't tour. We do visits. We go out, we get on a plane to Vancouver and fly to Toronto or fly to St. John's or fly to Calgary or whatever and do a gig and then come back. Or maybe we'll do two. Sometimes there's two, but usually it's just one.
Sounds pretty civilized.
Pretty civilized, a rather large carbon footprint. I'm not happy about that. It's the way I look at it is our job is to help people enjoy themselves, help them to feel good. I think when people feel good, they're often not aware of this, but when they feel good, they tend to make better decisions. When they feel crazy good, that's different. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying nuts good. I'm saying when they feel good, they make better decisions. They relate to other people better. That's our job, is to create that kind of atmosphere. So I feel that there is some payback there for the carbon footprint, but some may disagree.
What projects are you working on? I read somewhere that you were working on a musical and learning a new instrument.
I've worked on two different musicals with a guy named Bruce Riddell. Okay, fella, he's a friend of mine now, but we worked together on two different musicals. His name is Bruce Riddell. He came to me at first with something he'd written where he'd written symphonic stuff, but he hadn't written songs. Someone recommended to him that he come and visit me because I'm an actual songwriter. So we worked on two different musicals. As far as learning instruments, I was working with congas for quite a while. I love Cuban son music. And we went to Cuba numerous times, and I heard them playing the son. And I really just went, okay, I got to play that. I just love this stuff. So I got a couple congas and I worked on that until I got so much arthritis in my first finger from the slap. Like when you're playing a conga, your right hand comes down on the head and your last three fingers hit it first because your first finger's in the air and then it gets whacked It comes down onto the head, brack, like that. And it's very forceful. And conga players, a lot of them have bandages all over their hands. And I figured I'm not going to get too far with guitar if I keep doing this. So I quit that. I studied the fiddle for a few years, but it's not my instrument. And I realized that the amount of time I would have to put in on that would keep me from the guitar. And I decided, you know what? There's a whole lot I can still learn on guitar, so maybe I should get down to it. And that's what I've been doing.
Bill, what advice would you have for those thinking about being a songwriter or a musician for a living these days?
I'd say go for it. Do it. The thing about it is that music makes you feel good. Like I was saying before with audiences, music makes you feel good. And so that will sustain you. I know that doesn't sound like much when people are, your father-in-law is saying, yeah, but where's the money? And you just got to keep dancing. You got to keep doing it. You got to keep playing it. And you got to keep loving it. And you got to work your ass off and take every opportunity that comes up. Don't turn them down. Take them. Just take them one after another. Just keep taking them until you actually get in a position where you have a choice. You won't have a choice for quite a while. And also, any press is good press. That's what publishers say, right? You must know that, Peter.
Yes, I do.
That's an old line. That's an old line. It's like a Carney line. Yeah. Any press is good press. And the truth of that is that you have to get your name out. You really have to get known. That's what will do it. Of course, there's different kinds of musicians. Like you might want to be a classical musician, and you're not going to worry so much about those kinds of things. You're going to really study your music a lot, and that's great. You still will need an agent. You still have to have good relationships with people in the business, with promoters, agents, other musicians. Having good relationships is, if it ain't number one, it's number two. It's very high on the list because you got to work with people. They got to want to work with you. And be true to yourself, but that doesn't mean you have to be hard on other people. But it's important to be true to yourself. In your heart, you know who you are. And by knowing that, you know what your music is. You might not be able to spot it with your frontal lobe, your prefrontal cortex, but in your heart, you do know.
I'd like to thank Bill Henderson for being with us in this edition of Today in BC. If you have suggestions or comments, send a voice message to podcast@blackpress.ca. You may be part of our podcast mailbag segment. You'll find Today in BC podcasts on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, iHeart, and Google Podcasts.